Health coaching is an option for some of us that maybe can't go the full functional medicine route, or maybe there's some challenges that we can't just quite get worked out in the conventional model. Martin has a very unique take on that as a health coach, and we talk about a pretty wide range of things, but it's a really, really good conversation. Martin, excited to be visiting with you, brother. Diving into kind of the world of health coaching and how that differs from a lot of the advice we get, to say the least, from more of a mainstream or allopathic approach. So, your experience in functional medicine, I think, or functional medicine approaches and practices, there's something that I want to kind of lay that foundation out for. Like, what is functional medicine, and what is a health coach focused on functional aspects do?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm not a doctor. And people ask me, are you a doctor? And the answer is, well, if I were a doctor, I'd be telling you what your doctor is telling you. That's probably not what you need to hear. The medical approach, the Carnegie Rockefeller model of medicine, is to find a symptom or focus on a symptom and diagnose it, and then put a pill on it that will suppress the symptom without really asking what that's all about. To give an example, the restaurant owner contacts me and says, I have a rat problem. There's lots of rats. And I say, well, all right, I'm a doctor. Therefore, I will say the rats are a problem. Let's shoot the rats. But they come out at night, so you're shooting kind of in the dark, so you're probably going to shoot some raccoons and dogs and cats as well, but you get some rats. And the other thing you'll do is you'll lay poison. So, of course, some will eat the poison and die, but then the eagle will catch the rat and die because of it, because the rat was poisoned. Now, the functional approach is, let's look here. What's feeding those rats? Oh, sir, you have this garbage bin behind your restaurant and you're filling it with rat food, your scraps. So let's deal with that, take care of it. There will be no rats. They will either die or move away. So that's the explanation of functional versus allopathic, which is focus on a problem. And This is rampant through the society. Oftentimes we focus on the presenting problem, like we have a drug problem in the country and we're chasing the drug dealers without asking, why are people so desperate to want to numb themselves from their reality with chemicals? What's going on in their lives that they're so willing to take stuff up their noses and elsewhere?
I think it's a great analogy.
So that's the explanation of functional medicine. This happened to me. I actually am educated as a computer science and business administration guy. I was happily working in the information field, but I was getting very, very sick because of mercury poisoning. I got that from mercury amalgam fillings that I voluntarily had put in my mouth. I didn't know any different. I trusted the dentist. I was wrong.
Let's go into that a little bit. Let's go into some of the heavy metal aspects and how a health coach would approach that versus anyone else.
Right. Well, so whenever a person presents, most problems other than injuries like car accidents, falls, and bullet wounds is essentially a chronic disease that's taken years to build up. And much of that has to do with four things: toxicity, malnutrition, stagnation, and trauma. And the trauma I see as something emotional that you pick up through childhood. You will see things you shouldn't see, or you will live in an insecure environment. You can pick up all kinds of emotional damage that should get cleared. Stagnation is stuff mainly related to lack of movement, lack of exercise, sedentary lifestyle. The industrial society drives a lot of that. Malnutrition is a problem caused primarily by the industrial grade agriculture that's working soils too hard without replenishing, without remineralization, without regard to nutrient density in the foods. They look good, but chemically they're not as good as they were 150 years ago. And the last one is toxicity, which is presence of things in our environment and therefore within us that should never be there. And that's the industrial age. All the conveniences that we have gained through that, I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that I have a house with a roof and a comfortable sofa rather than a rock bed in a cave. Hallelujah. But we are putting heavy metals. Well, it started with burning of coal back in the early days, then petroleum, then plastics, and then herbicides and pesticides. All of that is getting into our food, our water, our air, our clothing, our cosmetics, our cleaning products. It's just coming at us. And those things will disrupt function. We're not built for living in this chemical soup. So as a health coach, I start asking questions, right? The symptoms that you have, let's just say that you have high blood pressure, you're pre-diabetic, your sexual function is declining, and you have headaches every third day. All right, well, what's that all about? Well, yeah, I need to detoxify you before anything, right? Like you cannot build a healthy body on a foundation that's toxic. So I need to get the stuff out of you.
So let's talk about those methods. Let's talk about how you would approach detoxification.
Right. So there is the metabolic toxicity, and then there's the industrial awful stuff toxicity. The metabolic toxicity, that's easy stuff. You need to have your elimination pathways working. So you need to be not constipated, and you need to be able to sweat freely, and you need to be able to just, your gut, your liver, your kidneys, they need to function. So we need to monitor that. We need to know about that. But more than anything, we need to first get the industrial toxins out. You can take tests. They're not cheap. And they will tell you, well, I have such and such and such in my body. Or you can just assume that you're toxic and just do the method. I have been using zeolite and humic and fulvic acid very successfully. They're very easy to take. You just take it orally without having to go to a doctor's office and have IV drips and who knows what else. These things work rather well. And $300-400 worth of this stuff will detoxify most people to a level where the function starts to return. Or I should say, the blocking factors that are disrupting the normal expression of the homeostatic body's ability to work to its perfect design is restored. You remove the blocks, all of a sudden things work again.
Yeah. Let me throw something at you and see how you agree or disagree with this. I think that the most natural way at which we detoxify, especially let's say heavy metals or whatever, is the minerals, right? We've got to have appropriate minerals to be able to detoxify these things. And we are so mineral deficient based on of the food system that we have, the overtaxing, think stress and reducing magnesium. We've got this wide range of deficiency and an overburden of these things coming out. But another one that I think is unbelievably important that we've got to talk about, aside from optimizing the microbiome, is the lack of sunlight, right? The lack of sunlight is one of the most important things to detoxify the body on a wide range of things, from making the appropriate circadian rhythm with the microbiome to line that out appropriately, sleep properly, sweat, right? Activate lymph tissue. Like there's so many things that it does. And we now, in the industrial world you're talking about, are under these artificial lights. We have depleted UVB completely out of life, right? We have no infrared coming in, so nothing works right. And so any sort of foundation, in my estimation, has to start with light and the disconnection from nature. So what are your thoughts on that? And then I love diving into some more things that we get, but let's hit there first.
Right. So yes, there is a way to do it naturally. So bare feet on the ground, so you can be grounding to get the electrons in, exposing yourself to the sunlight every day because you're supposed to be exposed. You should be actually looking directly at the sunrise and sunset into your eyes to get the photons in. Yes, all of that. So we have technological solutions for every one of these problems. Like I have an electron charger, which will help you replenish the missing electrons. I have an UVA, UVB light that can be shining on you so that you can replenish the lack of proper sunlight. But gosh, you can get it so inexpensively just doing the natural thing.
Right, and let's highlight one more thing. You are in a completely different latitude than I am, right? So I'm in Arkansas, you're in Canada. That is an extremely
Yeah,
important aspect, right? Because we
yeah,
have the seasonality of it, right? You're going to
yeah, yeah.
get much, much less UVB than I can, and I'm going to get much less than if I was at Ecuador, right? So
Mm.
talk to the nuance. I agree that technology fills in a gap, 100%, especially in a case where we're living in a more northern latitude. But again, the freeway, the nature way, the way God designed it, is probably our best bet.
Well, the number one reason you want to be exposed to sunshine is for your body to make vitamin D. That's the number one. Of course, I remember my mom in the 50s would force me to swallow a tablespoonful of fish oil every
I
day.
do agree.
Oh, yeah. And she would take me what was known then as the mountain sunshine, which was actually, as a 2 and 3 year old, I have a picture of myself sitting in just underwear with other children with these special black glasses on so we don't burn out our retinas. But we were being exposed to this UVB light,
Yeah,
right? Like we were actually taken to this clinic where we were exposed for half an hour to these intense rays.
yeah.
It
Heliotherapy.
was That was a primitive suntan booth, really, but yeah, that.
Well, I think that, before we hit record, we talked a little bit about getting censored and having some keywords that knock us. And for some reason, this is the one that has absolutely shocked me. Some of them, like I was expecting. But when I discuss melanin and melanin in depth, I get hit from Google and YouTube. And so I find that really, really interesting because the molecule melanin, right? You said, vitamin D is probably the most important. I would argue melanin may be more important than vitamin D. And that goes back into everything that we've talked about from the detoxification. It actually it works very similar to how plants do. It does so many things, right? Utilizes sunlight to break water into hydrogen and oxygen that feeds the electron transport chain, just on and on and on, right? So
Yeah.
with with that, the melanin conversation, especially deep, like the neuromelanin, is so unbelievably important. And the fact that I have been censored because of it makes me want to talk about it more and understand it better. So, if you have any thoughts on that realm?
I must confess, I don't know enough. I know that I have Swedish genetics. When I expose myself to sunshine, I have maybe 15, 20 minutes at noon in summer before I burn.
Yeah,
Right? Like I turn into a lobster fairly quickly.
yeah,
Unlike my father, who had the Turkish genetics, which I didn't get because of my mom, he would suntan looking like a Cherokee Indian.
yeah,
He was dark
yeah.
by the end of the summer.
So have you
And
looked much into like Doug Wallace's work around the coupled and uncoupled haplotypes from like mitochondria, right? So you're going to have this uncoupled haplotype from the
yeah,
Swedish, right? The
yeah,
Nordic blood, to
yeah,
where embracing cold actually is massively beneficial. So
right.
I was just curious if because you got the mitochondria from mom. So have you looked into any of that and been able to play around that with your health coaching?
Again, this is not something that I have spent enough time on. I have been focusing on food because that
Yeah.
has been such a big problem. Where never mind the light, you're right. It's super important, right? The electrons from the ground, the light from the sun, all of those are super important. And yet, I have been finding people breaking down just from eating badly.
Sure.
So that
Sure.
has been the focus of my practice, where I've been helping them saying, well, okay, you don't get enough sunshine, we'll push some vitamin D.
Martin, I think that what you just said is a part of the message that I struggle with, because when we look at the photosynthetic cycle, right, the foundation of food, it is sunlight. And so what I believe is the food problem has as much to do with the disconnection from nature and the geographic location at which we're living, right? So we're getting food from warehouses, from industrial facilities, or we're shipping it from across the world, right? It's a completely different sunshine input. So, like, this is where I'm not dogmatic about necessarily a keto or plant based or carnivore, although I am much more animal based, for much more animal based. And the reason for that is all about this sunlight topic that is very difficult to grasp fundamentally. But what food is literally exactly what you just said about the sunlight and the grounding. It's a breaking down into electrons and protons to supply the
Yeah.
body with energy, right? And
Well,
so we just
yeah.
got a mismatch, right? So eating a pineapple in December in Canada makes no logical sense to me, right? So, uh, what are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, let me say this. The way I see it is the photon arrives and the
Hmm.
plant through the chloroplast will actually store that photon in the form of sugars or starch or something like that. It will convert it. So when you eat a plant, it's actually slowed down and stored light energy. And so when I ingest it, I'm converting the plant food in presence of oxygen in my mitochondria back into the effect of light itself.
Absolutely.
So that part is quite interesting. As far as the animal food and latitude and all of that, well, okay, to give an example, genetically, if a child is born to a Bedouin tribe in North Africa, he's going to be eating dates, figs, pomegranates. They'll be feeding him camel milk all day long and stuff like that. Sugars and sugars and sugars and carbs. And he'll be 10th generation Bedouin child. He'll be just fine.
Right.
He's genetically adapted to it. Now,
Where
contrast that with somebody being born in Norway, where the growing season is 90 days long. You're 60 degrees north. You're living on dried cod and salmon and maybe some reindeer and whatnot, and
right.
you have very short vegetable growing season. And you probably will store sauerkraut for the rest of the year, and you will ferment your fish and do all kinds of things like that. So I cannot take this Bedouin child to Norway and feed him the Norwegian diet because his genetics don't work for it.
Which plays exactly into that haplotype, right?
Yeah, that's
The
what you started
Yeah.
about. Yeah,
Absolutely. And that is why we see, for example, a lot of the Central African population when they go to, say, Minneapolis or Detroit or Ottawa, right? They have these metabolic catastrophes is because it's just a mismatch, right? It
yeah,
is the complete lack of sun. And throw in another aspect of what you just said is you just discussed extremely high deuterium foods at more of a lower latitude versus very low deuterium foods at a high latitude. And that's
yeah,
exactly how nature or God has designed it to be
yeah,
low deuterium north, high deuterium's more equatorial. So
Yeah.
what does that look like as far as your realm of coaching? And I want to tie this together with what I'm obviously not familiar with in the metabolic typing that you do. So how does metabolic typing tie into this broader conversation?
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about that. So there are two main metabolic dominances. The labels are oxidizer and autonomic, and the oxidizer converts or reacts to fats and proteins by becoming more alkaline and becoming more acidic from starches. The autonomic is the other way around. He becomes more alkaline from carbohydrates and more acidic and from fats and proteins. Now, here's what it looks like. When you acidify a person, they wake up early, raring to go, and if they're always motivated to do things, but they're impatient, and if they become more acidic, they lose their social graces. They start interrupting others and be just talk fast and just driving. And then in extreme, if it's externally directed, it's rage, road rage. That's a classic over acidic example. If it's internally directed, then it's anxiety. They're reliving their past, as in regretting stuff that they did, that they wish they didn't, and stuff like that. Or they live in the future where they're rehashing or imagining what may happen, and mostly in fear. So that's the anxiety side, over acidic. The alkaline person tends to wake up late, is very jovial, friendly, easygoing, but is a procrastinator. And then in deeper, more alkalinity gets them into despondence, hopelessness. And then further out, there's depression. Out and out. I'm not getting out of bed today. Cover over my head. The world is too awful. I'm not coming out. So we want to bring people somewhere to the middle. And some people, we have an autonomic that's either overly acidic in the morning or overly alkaline in the morning. So if the person's already too alkaline, I can't feed him carbs, I must feed him fats. Otherwise, I'll just push him right over the top. You can see this with alcohol being an example of a carbohydrate. People who are the oxidizers, the more they drink, the more confrontational they'll get. They'll be argumentative and they'll pick fights with one another. Whereas the autonomics, they will overshare. They will become overly emotional. They will regret saying things that they shouldn't have said, and then they fall asleep. So the autonomics, they will take a nightcap and relax and go to sleep. If an oxidizer takes a nightcap, he wakes up and wants to go to town. So that's the effect, right? So people who are already acidic, you want to bring toward the middle so they have better choices. Otherwise, they're ragey or anxiety-riddled individuals. But you don't have a universal answer. You need to know if that person is an oxidizer, I need to feed him fats. If that person is an autonomic, I need to feed him carbs to bring him closer to the middle.
How do you go about identifying those things?
Just by testing, right? Give yourself 2 shots of whiskey and you're either falling asleep or you're wanting to punch somebody out.
Okay. It's a pretty straightforward test.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it more ecological, right? Like you can say, okay, let's try a fat test, right? Like I give you a spoonful of coconut oil and you eat that, and 20, 30 minutes later, you're either more anxious or more sedated. And then I'll flip it and I'll give you 2 bananas. And again, that's all carby stuff. You will react in the opposite way from the fat. And that's enough to determine it.
Martin, is this something that is kind of just settled and consistent, or is this something that has maybe a seasonal component, or even going back to the latitudinally aspect?
Yeah, excellent point. Some people are variable. Some women are variable in with their cycle, like the first 2 weeks before ovulation, they may be a vegetarian, and after ovulation, they may be a hunter, or vice versa. And some people have a morning that's one style and evening that's the other. They're more rare, but they exist. We have
Interesting.
some people that are variable. So they need to actually learn to understand themselves, saying, oh, yeah, I need to push the farmer ranchero breakfast because that's what settles me down. But in the evening, I have to become a vegetarian. Or the other way around, right? That exists. And there's this thing called endocrine dominance, which has some of us needing to eat large breakfasts and small dinners, whereas that's the pituitary dominant. The adrenal dominant is the other way around. They like to eat small breakfast or no breakfast and large dinners. And the thyroid dominant, they are 3 even meals. And they need to have protein with meals. Otherwise, they become carboholics and they just become completely unable to control themselves, looking for starchy things to fill their mouth with.
What do you think is the most important factor in being in whatever category?
It's the starch versus fat balance.
Is
Because,
that come from more of the ancestral component? You think it's more genetic, or
well,
is
ancestry and genetics is one and the same thing, right?
sure?
You inherit your genetics from your ancestors. And I think we were pre-selected by this. Let's just imagine a child born 1,000 years ago somewhere in Switzerland. He's living on what grows there. So that's going to be rye bread, aged cheese, sauerkraut. On Sunday, they'll kill the chicken. And in February, when it's cold enough, they'll butcher the pig.
Right.
That's the Swiss diet. So a boy is born into that family. If he's genetically matched, he'll do just fine. If he's mismatched, he's going to be weaker.
Yeah.
And then the next infection runs through the village and he probably dies. And it was quite common for a woman to, say, have 12, 14 children, but only 4 or 5 of them grew up to reproduction.
Yeah.
So only the most fit, only the most suited for the local situation were strong enough to live. Right? So that's how you end up with, say, the Eskimo living on raw seal meat and blubber from whales, never seen a vegetable in their life, and they survive it. Right? Or the Plains Indian follows the buffalo, eats pemmican, which is bear fat and berries in the winter, but chases the buffalo and eats red meat in ketosis all his life, right? And then the white man shows up with bread and whiskey and totally destroys their ability to cope.
See, I think what you just laid out, in at least in my mind, Martin, is the almost more of an argument for the mitochondrial DNA, right? I think that you started this with your own personal Turkish father, Swedish mother, Norwegian mother. The mitochondria that you got has had arguably a larger effect on you personally than your dad's DNA.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's there. I don't know if it's matrilineal, as you're saying, if it's inherited through mothers. Probably is. I don't know. All I know is that when I meet you and you're telling me, I just get so depressed, I'm saying, okay, let's do an experiment. Eat something high fat. Is that depressing to you, or is that keeping you out of depression? And let's retest it with something really starchy. And again, does that depress you or not? And then we say, oh, okay, so for you, the way you will manage your mood is we'll push let's just say the fat, which is keeps you out of the being overly alkaline, and there's your ticket.
Really cool. I'm gonna play around with that. I think that that is a really interesting concept, and the best way all of us to learn is to experiment on ourselves. I think
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that's something we're discouraged from doing, but that's how you know yourself. So, uh,
right.
to tie this in with one of the most focused parts of what I do, the cancer approach, right? I want to hear your thoughts around like what is cancer and then how you work with people, because
Yeah.
that's something, Martin, I've had countless oncologists and radiologists and PhDs across all kinds of spectrums that do not agree or do not really have this just definitive definition. So and that's not a knock on
Okay.
anybody. That's just a, hey, this is still an elusive aspect of what we're trying to understand. That's a big deal.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
curious your thoughts.
Yeah. The story of the six blind men describing an elephant. The one standing by the side said, "It feels like a wall." And the guy standing at the front touching it and says, "Feels like a fire hose." And the guy at the side of the head says, "Nah, it feels like a bed sheet." It was the ear, right? But anyway, they're just narrow focus looking at something and trying to describe it without really understanding the big picture. There's a phenomenal researcher. His name is Thomas Seyfried. You can find him on the internet, on YouTube even.
Yep.
And his lecture explains that cancer is a metabolic disease. It's not a genetic problem. You may have genetic predisposition to something, but it is actually a metabolic problem. And this metabolic problem, well, we have those four things that I discussed: toxicity, malnutrition, stagnation, and trauma. The worst thing is that when you have this happen to a child, where did this come from, right? Like when you see a 45-year-old woman come down with colon cancer, you say, well, she has been eating a certain way and she has earned that colon cancer by becoming toxic and constipated and blah, blah, blah. But what the heck with a 5-year-old, right?
Right.
And some of it is intergenerational. Like what should be known is that the egg that became the child was in the mother when that mother was gestating inside of her grandmother's womb. So the vibrational stuff goes through multiple generations.
Absolutely.
And it even goes through men too. There's that. There's the trauma inherited through generations. There's toxicity. The placenta is used as a dumping ground for detoxing the mother. Nature treats the mother as a precious resource, but does not treat the child as anything special. So, especially first and second born children inherit a lot more of the toxic burden that the mother has carried. It's dumped into the placenta. And so, especially firstborn have more of the autistic spectrum problem, or could have the toxicity that may give rise to cancer. Don't know, hard to tell because it's just, we just don't have enough data.
Right.
And so metabolically, cancer may have thousands of secondary causes, but the primary cause is that the cell flips from respiration to fermentation. Respiration is plenty of oxygen available locally, and the cell is producing carbon dioxide as it's converting glucose to energy, to ATP. Fermentation is sort of like the Krebs cycle running backwards, where you're producing lactic acid as your output, and you're only producing 2 units instead of 34 units of energy out of a single calorie of glucose. So it's much less efficient, but it's producing a lot of acidity. Cancers in general, the firm, like tumor-style cancers, can be pushed away by alkalizing the local environment. So if you could inject baking soda right into the site, you would be able to, at least locally, reduce the the problem. So that's not easily done. So you need to figure out how you can alkalize the terrain. So it's either blocked by presence of toxicity, or it's blocked by the pH of the fluids that are inside the body. So if you have somebody who's overly acidic, they're very likely to, well, this is known, their oxygen carrying capacity is reduced. That example has been, for example, shown with acidic lake or acid lakes. Is that what it was called? Back in the earlier days, coal burning power plants were putting a lot of sulfuric acid in the lakes, in the rain, right? Acid rain rained on the lakes, dropped the pH balance, the water lost its oxygen capacity, and the lake died. Fish couldn't live in it. Our cells are a lot like that. The cell takes the oxygen from the body fluids. So if the body fluid is very acidic, there's no oxygen to be taken out. So the chance of going cancerous is greater. Now, the other cancers, like leukemia or lymphoma and the likes, the fluid cancers, they're from over-alkalinity rather than from over-acidity. So that's a completely different problem. So from a coach perspective, right, I need to ask, is there a local toxic problem we need to detoxify? Is there a body pH problem? We need to reset the pH, correct it. And 3, the body is not that stupid. It's making lactic acid for a reason. So if we start supplementing lactic acid into the colon, you can push it through an enema, or you can even swallow it, which would mean vinegar or vitamin C, or what are the popular ones? Propionic, valeric, butyric. Those are all the acids that the body will properly use. And so when you get the mineralization, when you have the minerals with which you can build the acids, all of a sudden things will start improving. The body will find the strength. So you hit on that earlier on, is you said, what if I have somebody who's lacking minerals? And who's not lacking minerals eating the industrial foods?
Right.
So the terrain is set, right? It's like you're teetering on the edge of maintaining health, and then something happens and you start losing it.
Really, really cool.
So to bring it back together in a simple way, I need to understand your metabolic type so I know how to alkalize you if you have a tumor. Without it, I can't bring you back. And this happens. I've talked to people who have gone to the Hippocrates Institute and put themselves on a vegetarian diet of raw food, carrot juice, whatever, came back 3 weeks later worse off, almost dying.
Right.
And I said to this person, well, get a salad and buy a whole salmon and eat that in the next 4 days. And sure enough, they start feeling better because they have the hunter genetics that don't respond well to carrot juice.
Yes, Martin, there's so many different directions I kind of want to go here. I want to say something that's going to sound like heresy, right? Because as somebody that's a really, really, really questions modern medicine, the solution for most people is just functional, right? And to me, there's so many of the same problems. We are charging people so much money for the tests, same as allopathic. We're charging so much for supplements and stuff, same as the pharmaceuticals. So to me, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, really, of trying to pick one or the other, and we're missing these very fundamental basics. So I find myself kind of between all these worlds that just don't make sense. And so the lack of sunlight, the lack of focusing on minerals, the lack of focusing on environment and the seasonality of life, right? Just the complete disconnection of nature seems to me why nothing has a foolproof method, okay? And then you take in you take in these last few years, and now I talk to cancer specialists every single day, right? Like I
Okay.
every single day. Uh, and over the last few years, cancer has been much more difficult to treat, right? And I'm hearing this over and over and over. And so the bad words that I'm not allowed to say of like turbo cancers, I'm not allowed to talk about SV40. I'm not allowed to talk about all of these things that
Oh
have
my Lord.
contributed, right?
You're throwing these trigger words, right? Like the SV40 gets into us because of the childhood injections that are
Absolutely.
given. The whole line is contaminated and primes us for failure to begin with, right?
Absolutely. And so we have to talk about them. We have to talk about them. And not only that, is we got to quit milking people of all their money to try to get better, right?
All
And I
right, all
think,
right. But listen, you are now playing an idealist card. It's okay, it's like this. On the savannah, you have lions and you have antelopes,
yeah,
and you have hyenas and whatever else, right? But the point is this: the lions will only hunt the weak antelope,
sure.
right? Of, speaking of, the corporations that are doing what they're doing, they're predatory, they're parasitic, and they prey on the weak,
Right.
right? And unfortunately, billions of people or millions of people are weak. And you are
Preach.
totally putting your finger on it. Is the most revolutionary act a guy can do is grow his own food, expose himself to sunlight, drink clear filtered water. Well, these days, gosh, with the glyphosate that's been dumped all over America, I don't think you can find an aquifer that's not been contaminated with it. Anyway,
All right.
and I didn't say the one more important thing, which is this: cancer travels on the vibration of unforgiveness, a grievance. There is even such a thing as cancer personality. Really nice people who give away so much of themselves, but end up resenting something. And they will have a grievance against father, mother, brother, sister, God,
Yep.
whatever, something. And until they're able to, in their heart, find gratitude, they have a problem getting rid of the oh gosh, the vibration of cancer.
I could not agree with you more, and I've got a backstory that I'll tell you, later. That's in the Lord's Prayer, right? Forgive us of our
Perfect.
trespasses, we forgive
Yes,
those who
that's it.
trespass against us,
That
right?
is the ticket.
Yeah. And so there is a spiritual component to absolutely every single, if not the most fundamental aspect of healing. But well, I want to go. That is super important. I hate to go on a tangent here, but I want us to wrap up with making this actionable, right? That hey, just if we can get more in touch with nature, and for some reason when I say that I get a little bit of pushback on thinking that I'm anti-tech, as I've got a phone and a light sitting here, blaring in my face, and that's how I make a living, is running a business, right? But it means living more ancestrally appropriate with the geography at which we are, right? Like it's local, it's seasonal, and it's natural. Those should not be controversial
Mm.
ideals, right? Get in the
Yeah,
sun, get in the sun,
yeah, yeah,
and,
yeah.
and that's really the foundation. Now, all of these tools, as we try to overcome
Right.
the
Well, let's
things.
let's unpack it a little bit.
Let's
Yeah.
unpack it.
So, number one, you cannot solve a problem caused by toxicity by adding toxins into the problem. That's one, right? So, you have to take things away. A lot of our thinking is additive. We try to throw stuff at it, but many times, actually, we just need to take stuff away.
Beautiful.
So, simplify is a really good concept. One, then, the toxicity. It's hard to solve a heavy metal problem because there's nothing in our body that prepared us for it. Genetically, we don't have tools for it. So I need some technical solution, and I found zeolite and fulvic acid. They really work. They do bind and help drag stuff out of the body. So everyone should do it because it takes out not just the arsenic and lead and mercury, but also the volatile organic compounds and the PFOAs and the other forever chemicals that are now filling the environment. That's really important. So that's very actionable. I take that every day.
Yeah.
I have a bottle right here. This is a zeolite mixed with marine plasma and 5 drops twice a day. Okay?
Cool.
That's detox. Just get rid of toxic things. So read labels. Do not play with hot plastics. Do not microwave your food in plastic dishes. Do not leave your water bottles in a hot car. Actually, how do you know that the plastic water bottle that you just bought did not sit in a hot truck for a week somewhere?
It did, I guarantee you.
I know. Okay, so get rid of plastics because that is the number one thing, these xenoestrogens, that are contributing to this de-differentiation of genders. Boys can't tell if they're boys or girls, and vice versa. That is a problem, and it's the plastics more than anything. So again, keep your life cleaner. Like, don't, yeah, okay, you want to have your phone, great, but please find some way to mitigate the EMFs because the EMFs are causing your body to get triggered with, it's called voltage-gated calcium channel. It causes flooding of your cells with too much calcium, which is the signal molecule for fight or flight, the stress side. So you're living in anxiety mainly because you're bathed in so much of the EMF stuff.
Have you read any of Robert O'Becker's work? Body Electric?
Yes. Oh, yes. That's lower frequencies.
Yes.
That's different. That's voltage, right? That's DC. I'm talking about AC at very high frequencies. There is a guy, his name is Martin Pall, Pall, PhD, multiple studies. You can look him up. He's studied this and published heavily on this. The body electric. Well, now we're going to talk about parasites and the general integrity and stuff like that. That is also needed. But that relates back more to the grounding, to barefoot on the moist ground, swimming in lakes and swimming in oceans, and even taking showers works.
Yeah. I think the water conversation is probably like a series of podcasts. I think that we have tried to oversimplify water and don't fully understand the beauty and how incredible water is, right? Versus metabolic, endogenously produced, or spring water, or all the other different topics, right? So give me kind of your top 3 to wrap up things to just, hey, do this and it's at least a start.
Right. You mentioned water. It needs to be not contaminated. And yes, it should be charged or uncharged. We sell gadgets that help to structure water properly. It's important. Do not think that water, well, we are a water-based creature. They call us carbon life, but we really are a water-based. Like, the blood is like seawater modified. The lymphatic fluid is seawater modified. You cannot underestimate just how important that is. Air quality, water quality, food quality, mineralization, pigments. Do not, okay, nutrient density is important. It's common that we eat foods that are calorie rich, nutrient poor, which mostly grains, wheat, corn, soy, they are subsidized by the government because the large agricultural lobby is holding them hostage. There's billions of dollars being subsidized from all the taxpayers into the hands of large-scale farming that grows swaths of corn, wheat, and soy. That should not be happening. The subsidy should be on broccoli and spinach, and apple and blueberry, or whatever, that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. I think that the whole centralization is kind of the problem, right? It's
Yeah,
the whole world of being ran by corporations and the
yeah,
centralization of everything that's happening. So
yeah,
like that's why I'm such a proponent of regenerative agriculture. It's just in line with nature, and that's why we
yeah,
cover that
yeah,
so much on this channel. So uh,
yes.
Martin, where do we send people to follow up with you, learn more
Mhm.
about your work and everything that you're
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah, my business is called Life Enthusiast, and the website is life-enthusiast.com. Come find it. There are 500 podcast episodes that I've recorded, and there are thousands of articles that we have published, all supporting that which I tried to summarize here in just a few minutes. We have just touched the highlights.
Man, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to visit and just bring it together, because something I wanted to hit on a little bit with the functional side, right, of it's not covered by insurance in most cases, and it's tests and supplements that are very, very expensive, and it's just not a feasible option, right? And so the health coach, I think, can be a massive positive, or it can also be a train wreck, right? We got to have the right fit, we got to have the right practitioners in that role too. So but it's a much more economic model for people when you find the right one to help guide
Yeah.
through some sort of a medical catastrophe. So, there's just pros and cons to all of it. And I just wanted to highlight that health coach role may be the perfect fit for somebody.
Yeah, I help people become self empowered, educated enough so that they can make their own decisions. The the high cost approach, I'll give me $6,000. I run $3,000 worth of tests with it. It works, but you won't get ahead with it. All you will know is that you're toxic with this, and this. You still have no change. You only know a lot about just how bad it is.
Yeah.
It's better to assume that it's bad and just start digging out of the hole.
I agree with you on that one. I agree with you on that one too. Martin, thank you, brother. Thank you again for taking the time. I think we kind of went super high level for the most part, and I think that there's so many rabbit trails that may have piqued somebody's interest that they can go down because it is an extremely complex aspect of life, and so there's a lot to it.
Mhm. Yep. Big picture. It's complex. You said it well. And all of the things have to be looked after.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like having 36 holes in your roof. Okay, so you fix the first 20 and you still will have to be catching water under the 16.
Yeah.
But over time, we'll fix all of them. There will be a day when you'll be sitting on a rainy day saying, it's all good.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for joining the Sowing Prosperity podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you for joining us in the Sowing Prosperity mission. If you like this content, like and subscribe, share with your friends. Be sure to check out sowingprosperity.com. Sign up for the email. We've got so much more work to do.